Hi there. I'm only recording one video today because I I can. I want to at least try to record one video at least a day. I was debating doing two, but I was like, no, I want to write today. So you guys are getting one. Sorry. But you may get a stream later. Don't know if I'll do it or not, but maybe. Considering I stream while writing with others. Today instead of tea, I have hot cocoa because I wanted hot cocoa and we had the powder, so I made hot cocoa. So, that's a thing. If I get sick after this, well, fuck my possible lactose intolerant self. But yeah, who cares? Anyway, this is chapter 5 of I Borrowed a Cat's Paws by CrouchingTiger28. On to the chapter. Cat food was not nearly as objectable as Shota had expected. As far as he could tell, he really didn't have taste buds as a cat. At least, not nearly as sensitive as even his mostly burnt out human taste buds. The dry cat food had a nice crunch. It didn't have a notable temperature. And that was good enough for the cat version of him. He would be fine with eating this for a while. Then again, he was the sort of person who would gladly subside on nothing but mostly flavorless jelly pouches. While Shota crunched his way through a bowl of cat food and tried to drink water with nothing but his tongue, the League of Villains was shouting at each other about video games. No, he was not kidding. He desperately wished he was. Kill stealer, Shigaraki hissed. He was mine. He demonstrably was not. Dobby drawled. And then there was a fury of rapid button pressing and several choice swear words. Shota rolled his eyes and crunched another dry pellet. He hadn't even brought into question the humanity of Toga's mother. Bakugo cursed worse than that in his sleep. Got it, Toga crowed, and there was a brief scuffle. How? Spinner demanded. That's not even how the game works. Hacks, Shigaraki snapped. Not hacks, Toga pouted. Glitches. Get wrecked, Shiggy. Bleh. Shota glanced half-heartedly at the love seat, and sure enough, Toga had her tongue sticking out and one finger pulling down her eye. It was a gesture that looked a lot more impressive on someone with a long oral quark tongue, but it was still the sort of thing he'd expect from a middle school girl. Standing beside Shota, with one hand resting on the bar top, Kurogiri let out a long sigh. Despite himself, Shota reached out to pat the man's dress shoe sympathetically. Shota knew a great deal about problem children. As the only apparent voice of reason in the group, Kurogiri deserved as much sympathy as Shota could muster. Rematch! Spinner snapped. I demand a rematch. I'm done, Toga said immediately, dropping her controller on the cushion. Guri, can I have some lemonade? Of course, Miss Toga, Kurogiri said, ignoring the outraged shouts from the couch as he stepped away to get the supplies. Shota turned away from his half-empty bowl of cat food, or completely empty if you consulted an actual cat, and eyed the distance up to the bar top. Toga had claimed one of the bar stools, but there were still 2.5 that were standing empty. A half because literally half the bar stool had been burned away. The low back now a mess of melted metal and the cushion charred. Shota jumped up onto that one, and from there up onto the bar's top. Kuragiri turned around with a lemon in one hand and a glass in the other, and Shota could practically see the man's exhaustion settle on his shoulders. Kitty! Toga chirped and shoved her hand in Shota's face. Shota flattened his ears at her, pulling his head back and lashing his tail. Perhaps, Kuragiri suggested, you can leave the kitty alone until he approaches you. Ah, Toga visibly deflated, draping herself across the bar top. But I want to pet him. He looks so soft. She made grabby hands at Shota, but thankfully didn't actually try to touch him. He is, Dobby said smugly, slumping in the half-melted bar stool. Very soft. The softest cat I've ever pet. Even softer than Toto. Toga whipped her head around, staring at Dobby like he'd personally set her puppy on fire. He let you touch him? When he was asleep, Dobby shrugged. I'm warm. No fair! Toga said, sitting upright and radiating righteous fury. But didn't you hold him on the train, Toga-chan? Mr. Caprince asked, slipping into the bar stool on the right side of Toga. That's true. Toga visibly brightened. Oh, I remember now. He is soft. I want to pet him again. And she was immediately back to pouting. Toga Shota flicked his tail irritably, looking away from Toga to track Kuragiri. The mistman had finished juicing the lemon by hand and was mixing several different sugar waters together. Shota mentally recited the fancy lemonade recipe that Oboro had taught him. Kuragiri followed the exact same steps as Oboro from his memory. A single lemon, juiced and zest. A dash of soda for fizz. Simple syrup for sweetness. And a scoop of ice for crunch. Finally, top it all off with... Kuragiri reached for the spot on the countertop that held only air. He hesitated for a moment and retrieved a bottle of strawberry syrup from the back of the counter. Raspberry Cortel for color. Oboro's voice finished cheerfully. It showed his head as Kuragiri drizzled strawberry syrup over the layer of ice at the top of the cup. It seeped through the ice to billow and swirl beneath it, mixing into the lemonade like blood and seawater. Thanks, Guri. Toga Toga grasped her cup with both hands, pulling it towards her across the bar top. Sako? Kuragiri asked. Dobby? Can I get you anything? Mr. Capress shrugged elegantly, but Dobby requested a cup of coffee, which Kuragiri readily provided. Shota watched the exchange longingly. He'd done some research when Missy kept trying to get into his coffee, and he learned that cats could handle barely 20 milligrams of caffeine per kilo of body weight. At his meager 4 kilograms, approximately, that left Shota with 80 milligrams of caffeine being potentially deadly, unless his human caffeine resistance carried over to cat form. But Shota wasn't willing to stake his life on that. And a saucer of cantaloupe water for the kitty. Kuragiri added, setting a saucer on the bar top. Shota stared at it, and then at Kurogiri. Don't look at me like that, Kurogiri told him. Most cats suffer from dehydration, and cantaloupe water in moderation won't do you any harm. Aw, Toga cooed. He has his own drink. Shota reluctantly stuck his tongue in the saucer, carefully lapping up the cantaloupe water. It tasted almost like a jelly pack with his muted feline flavor receptors. Something moved in his peripheral vision. It showed his head snapped up. His teeth were bared and his back arched before he even bothered to think about it. And he swiped at the hand reaching for him with unsheathed claws. Stop trying to touch the cat, Dobby groaned, staring into his coffee cup as he slowly swirled it in tiny circles. I'm bleeding! Toga gasped, sounding absolutely delighted by the fact. Shota watched her cautiously as she licked the blood from the tiny scratches on her hand. He knew she had a thing for blood, and she'd mentioned that she found it cute when things were covered in blood. She also mentioned that she thought he was cute in this form. Generally, Shota preferred to not be covered in blood. That's what happens when you try to touch feral cats, Dobby sighed. Usually fleas is what happens when you touch feral cats. Mr. Compress put it coolly. There was a beat of silence, and then everyone turned to Shota. He will certainly need a bath, Kurogiri said, and Shota was proud of the dubious, almost cautious tone in the mist villain's voice. Less than an hour of being awake in the villain's hideout, and they were already scared of him as a house cat. And a collar, Mr. Press put it even more dubiously. Shota hissed at him. Technically, Kurogiri said, a collar isn't necessary for an indoor cat. Unless he gets outdoors, Mr. Compress said, in which case we'll never find him again without a collar. I'll slip any collar you put on me, Shota told him bluntly, his ears still flattened in irritation. None of them understood him, of course, but hopefully he got his point across. Before anything else, he'll need a bath, Kurogiri said firmly, and since Shota actually agreed with him, who knew what residues that kid's Quark had left on his fur, he let it slide for the moment. Oh! Toga gasped, bolting upright and almost splashing lemonade over the bar top. He needs a name! No, Shigaraki snapped from the other side of the room. You can't name it. You'll get attached. Didn't you name your video game disposable dog Sidekick? Dobby asked. Yeah, and then I had to finish the campaign with the tutorial Sidekick. Shigaraki returned. No naming the cat. I'm gonna call him Dracula. Toga giggled, suddenly sliding one hand across the bar top closer to Shota. I'm partial to Miso Felice, Mr. Compress put it, or perhaps McCavity. If Shota hadn't been desperately pining for Hazashi in middle school, he wouldn't have recognized either of those names. But he had, and Hazashi always had a thing for old English media, especially musicals. So Shota had dug up old videos of the original New London Theatre performance of Cats and never ever spoken of it to anyone except Hazashi. But McCavity was Ginger. It was literally in the song that Midcavity was ginger, and Miss Tofleece, while black, was supposed to be small. So help him if anyone brought up Skimble Snakes, who might as well have had a long tail but was brown and had green eyes. Shoto was going to riot. We could call him Charcoal, Dobby suggested. Coal for short. That's a stupid name. Twice called from the couch, followed immediately by, I like it. I believe we should let the cat have some hand in his own naming, Kuragiri said neutrally. Shota nodded, jabbing his tail in Kuragiri's direction. Then he paused. Since when could he point at people with his tail? Well, presumably since he had a tail, but he was getting better at controlling this form. In the meantime, Kuragiri said slowly, I suppose I'll have to give him a bath. Should have flicked his tail and considered how obstinate he was going to be about this. On the one hand, he desperately wanted a bath. On the other hand, he wanted to be as difficult as humanly possible in every conceivable way. If you'll follow me to the bathroom, Kitty, Kuragiri suggested tentatively. Shota considered the mist man, the door he was gesturing at, and the counter of valuable alcohol behind him, and the sink built into the counter. In less than a blink, Shota had leapt across the gap and was sitting in the sink, coolly licking a paw as if nothing had even happened. Or we could do it here, Kuragiri sighed. This kitty's got more attitude than Shigaraki does. Dobby snorted, downing the rest of his coffee. Would you like to step out while I fill the sink? Kuragiri asked, defeated. Shota elegantly leapt up out of the sink, lingering beside the fancy crystal glasses lined up on the counter, while Kuragiri stopped the sink and started the water running. Can you use regular shampoo on cats? Toga asked idly. Baby shampoo is recommended if you don't have cat shampoo, Kuragiri said, barring that, Dawn with dish soap. Like we've got budget for name brand? Dobby scoffed. I could get you Shiggy shampoo, Toga volunteered, already skidding off her stool. Don't touch my shampoo! Thank you, Toga, Kuragiri said, waving her on. Toga bounced out of the room and Dobby snorted. Shigaraki uses baby shampoo. It's for dry skin, bonehead. Shigaraki snapped. Don't you use gentle shampoo for your crummy hair dye? Kuragiri sighed, and Shota found himself once again sympathizing with the mist villain. Children were trying. Superpowered, somewhat entitled children, only more so. Dobby and Shigaraki devolved into another row that had a remarkable resemblance to the shouting matches Bakugo got in with, well, everyone. While they were arguing, Toga slipped back into the room, wielding a bottle of Johnson's baby shampoo. She passed it off to Kuragiri, who gladly accepted it. The sink is ready, Kuragiri said calmly, completely ignoring the altercation that was now getting physical. Blue sparks were racing over the edge of Dobby's scars, and Shigaraki had set his controller aside to curl his hands into fists. Shota followed Kuragiri's lead, ignoring the two infamous villains now squabbling with active quirks to gently test the water in the sink with one paw. It wasn't too hot or too cold, so Shota jumped down into the water. It was about 15 centimeters deep, only barely brushing the softer fur on his belly. and it actually felt kind of nice, like a swirling and drifty feeling that came from putting your hair underwater. But it was all over him. Shota lowered himself deeper into the water, soaking his fur all the way up to his ears. The water was almost hot around his whiskers, but it was calming, pleasant, like sitting in an onsen and letting the warm water whisk away the perpetual aches and pains and lingering nerve damage sustained in years of hero work. Never seen a cat that liked water quite that much, Mr. Capress observed. Should have spared him barely a flick of one ear, taking a deep breath so that he'd float. It is rare, Kuragir agreed. Perhaps he has some Maine Coon blood. With how short his fur is, Mr. Capress said doubtfully. Kuragiri only hummed. Mr. Kitty, I'm going to need to touch you for this. That caught Shota's attention, and he bared his teeth automatically, raising his wet fur into spiky clumps. I need to wash your back and sides, Kuragiri said, endlessly patient. But I won't need to go farther than that if you consent to wearing a flea collar. Shota actually stopped to consider that. As terrible as it sounded to have to wear a collar of any sort, it was better than getting fleas. It was also better than a villain bathing him. That was just wrong on so many levels. With a reluctant flick of his ears, Shota flattened his fur again, turning so Kuragiri could have better access. Kuragiri did exactly what he promised, lathering baby shampoo onto Shota's fur until he looked white instead of black. Shota willingly dunked himself under again, shaking vigorously to rinse all the mud and suds into the clear water. The water that quickly became cloudy with soap and dirt. And Shota was almost shocked that it had all fit in his fur. Kuragiri pulled the plug on the sink, and the water tugged at Shota's fur as it swirled down the drain. Then the sink sprayer nozzle came out, and Shota relented to being essentially hosed down, twisting and turning so that it got all the bubbles off. Finally, he was relatively clean, and Kuragiri set a towel on the counter beside the sink. Shota completely ignored it, jumping up onto the other side of the counter to shake and spray water all over Kuragiri's just cleaned bottles of alcohol. Kuragiri only sighed and held up another towel, channeling every imperious, self-satisfied feline Shota had ever witnessed. He graciously allowed Kuragiri to towel him dry. We'll need to get you a flea collar, Kuragiri said as Shota rubbed his chin against the towel to dry the bristly fur there. And likely a litter box. Shota couldn't help the way his nose wrinkled at that, but he honestly should have expected it. If he was quick, he could escape before they needed to bother. Save everyone some time and money. Is he even house-trained? Mr. Capress asked. Shota angled his ear sideways and shot Mr. Capress a positively scathing look. I suspect he can figure it out, Kuragiri said neutrally. Now sufficiently dry, Shota slipped out from under the towel and bounded to the ground. Old habits die hard, and despite what he told himself, he hadn't actually been ignoring the fight between Dabi and Shigaraki. They were still going at it, even now, but the recliner Shigaraki was in had been vacated, so the villain could make full use of his feral gremlin intimidation factor. Shota considered for a second, scanning the couch cushions, the seats in the kitchen nook, and the bar stools. He glanced at Shigaraki, who was baring his teeth at Dabi, who looked entirely unimpressed, and then back at the recliner. In a single smooth motion, Shota jumped onto the recliner. The seat was still warm, and Shigaraki's gaming console had been sit on the end table beside the recliner, so Shota had room to stretch out and take up the entire space. He did just that. Sprawling lazily over the cushion, he let himself relax enough to doze, but he stayed aware enough that he could spring away at a moment's notice. The argument abruptly cut off, and Shota twitched his ears, slitting his eyes open to investigate the sudden silence. Everyone in the room was staring at him. Toga with adoring heart eyes, Mr. Crepres vaguely surprised, Kurgiri a perpetually unreadable bank of fog, and Dobby looking smug and amused in equal measures. Shigaraki looked mildly constipated, or maybe like he'd been slapped in the face by a 6-year-old. That is my chair, Shigaraki hissed. Shota made a show of stretching luxuriously, yawning widely and flicking his tail, with as much devil-may-care self-confidence as he could muster. This cat is too smart for his own good, Davi said, visibly holding back laughter. First Guri's alcohol, now Shiggy's chair. What's he going to go for next? Toga's knives? Your hair dye, Shigaraki snarled, his hands curling into claws. Nah, Toga chirped. I think it'll be his mitts. Hey! Dobby scowled at them, and Shota watched with interest as he slid the glass bowl of cellophane-wrapped mint candies, which Shota hadn't even recognized as worth taking note of, across the bar top towards him. That is not the same at all. The first step to recovery is admitting you have a problem, Dobby. Toga intoned, so solemn and serious that Shota had to do a double take. I do not have an addiction, Dobby grumbled, then immediately belied his words by shoving 3 mints in his mouth at once. I just like mint, okay? He insisted around the candies. The cat is sitting in my chair, Shigaraki said bluntly, as if to remind everyone that he was upset. Toga shrugged, chewing loudly on the ice left in her glass. Sit somewhere else. Shigaraki growled. Like actually growled, despite having no mutation quirk, and started viciously scratching his neck. Blood beaded up under his fingertips, but Shota refused to be sympathetic. If Shota didn't get to keep his bones, Shigaraki didn't get to keep his chair. I'm so okay. This chapter was hard. So I actually have a little spectator here. You want to unmute Owl for a sec? Let's see if Owl's even paying attention. Earth to the Owl. I don't know if Owl fell asleep. At Owl, you can unmute.
What?
Oh, I'm still recording, but I wanted to see if you wanted to say hi.
Hello.
Yeah, so Owl's been listening this whole time. And basically, yeah, this is this chapter. Listen, the amount of times I laughed and I gave up on the Discord notifications, but I am gonna call out who did them. Link's Craft and Oak Shadow were the ones notifying me. I'll probably add them in the description, because I'm petty like that, and it'd be funny. I was also called by Dust, which is one of the bloopers. Oh yeah, talk about that. I'm gonna let you guys get on to the bloopers, and then bye, usual. And then, okay. The low back, now a mess of okay, we're gonna read. Shigaraki looked mildly constipated. Okay, I gotta reread.